Recording. Okay. So a couple things first. I believe after this meeting, you're going to get a survey from a person named Ann Mook, M-O-O-K. Ann works for the Institute for Research in Social Studies. I don't remember exactly the expansion of IRIS, but along with Gemma, who was helping us with some convergence activities, Anne was going to describe the growth of the team in in terms of a network. And so we missed the boat a little bit on it. Like it was supposed to happen right when we kicked off the project and it didn't. And so part of the survey that you'll receive, I believe later today, asks you to try to think back to the beginning of the project. So it'd be ideal to have like a snapshot at the beginning and a snapshot a year and a half in. But Anne's asking, and some of the asked questions will be think about the beginning of the project, and then the next snapshot will come next year. So do you have any questions about that? Ellison, you look super holidayed.
Oh, because of the red, I guess.
It's the red. You totally need a Santa Claus hat.
I see the pink. I don't really like red, and so I've been calling it pink and orange, but it's very red.
But
Oh,
Nurse Emma and Chris are wearing red, so we
oh
should
wow.
we should be cautious.
Yeah, we've got a lot.
Yeah, I guess I see the collar, so maybe it looks
Yeah,
pink.
no, it's true. It's true. I just ignore the red. Feel like it'll get me all the way through Valentine's.
That works. It's a bright spot of color, as you frequently are anyway. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to say before we began the discussion of themes is that there was a meeting where I talked about what I learned from NSF, and many of the PIs were not there. And so I'm wondering, you can go back and watch the meeting and hear what I learned, but I know that isn't as satisfying as being able to ask questions. And so, okay, yeah, good. So maybe my question is, would you like to have another meeting where you ask more questions, say early next year? And we'll probably need a meeting or two about strategizing what we're going to present. Does that seem like it would be a good idea to do that early in the year? Or would it seem like too much extra if you've already watched the video?
I mean, my view is that we watched the video. We talked today about understand where we are in our products and what we're aiming towards. And I would think when we have a little bit more actually done, it'll be more useful to then strategize as to what we present, because some things may fall through, some things may move ahead. But I definitely would want that strategic meeting. I'm just wondering about the timing as to whether we should just be a little further ahead.
Yeah, that's true too. That's why I'm asking, like, would it be too much emphasis on like pandering to NSF to have more meetings about it?
My view at this point, it doesn't seem like it, since we're like 6 months away from, well, 6 months away from a decision about whether they'll continue funding us or not. But I don't think it necessarily has to feel like pandering, just figuring out like what Narasima said, what do we have done and where does that fit for what we'd present to NSF.
Okay. Does anyone have a different opinion? I'm hearing like, let's delay a little bit. Okay, that's cool. So I didn't want to. Yeah, go ahead.
Just one thought is that the one thing I can imagine would be useful to deliberate more, which we have already started doing, is, what is the deep integration part and just kind of keeping track. Are we, doing that stuff as we intended to the best we can? Are we documenting it? And I know that I promised to write a couple things down about process and never ended up doing it, but I'd still like to. So that's the only thing I think it's worth discussing, maybe early in the year,
Okay,
if others agree.
okay. And so I'd like to give some attention to that today as we look at the themes, because in here are a few things that particular people are leading, but I think some of the integration is going to come from those folks who are leading a theme, asking for input, identifying where somebody could plug in, right? And so I encourage you to not just feel like I got to do this all myself, right? This is my theme. I got to lead it. I got to come out with a product. But think about the people who are in our team. What would you ask them for? Like, where you might not ordinarily do it. What would how would you like to incorporate the expertise of people? So as we go through that, we can think about that. The leaders can think about what they would ask for, and then if you're a person who's not on that theme or not listed in that theme, you can also offer. Like I think that you should benefit from my expertise in the following way. Okay, I've popped the link in the chat, and how many do we have? Wow, we have a lot. Okay, so in order for us to give fair time to each one of these, 1, 2, 6, 7, 8. I'm thinking let's start at the bottom. So not slide 10, but slide 9, that's Narasimha's. And I can put this on the screen so we can make sure we're all on the same page, literally. However, if if you feel more comfortable looking at it on your own computer, you can go to the link. Does that sound okay? And I'm going to assume that we're not going to read out what's on the slide unless people have questions or want it explained. Sound okay? I think we're all capable of reading. Okay, hold on. And I'll try to, how do I make this bigger? Okay, and so some of the discussion that we can have includes, what is this about? This sounds great, exactly what we need, but we don't need to do a lot of props. And then also any overlap that you see between what you think you're doing and what other people think they're doing. And I am still trying to figure out how to make it bigger. Too big. Okay. Okay, so we're going to start with you, Narasimha. Yeah, is this the right size?
Maybe a little smaller. You can see the
Yeah,
whole
I'm
thing.
trying to
90 or 75.
I'm gonna try to open it up. It's not letting me. Okay. Um, There, how about that? Okay, Narasimha, as I understand it, this is your review.
Yeah.
And you may want to say something about decisions you've made recently, since you shared those with the modeling team. I think you've made some limiting decisions lately, and so maybe you want to speak to that.
Sure, sure. So I was originally interested in reviewing a couple of things. One is just what is the state of knowledge about what influences decisions in the home to adopt heat pumps, drawing on social sciences particularly, as well as the modeling work, and then critiquing how whether or not these insights have been used in models to project future adoption. What would the implications be for how we need to think about future modeling efforts? And then we discovered that Lawrence Berkeley Labs, commissioned by DOE, were doing exactly such a review. And then I was thinking about teaming up with them. They've done this for EVs and PVs, and they are about to do it for heat pumps. And when I thought we should team up, because I thought they would have done a bunch already, but it turns out they haven't even started. So they actually were leaning on me and wanted me to co-author with them. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I decided to just not collaborate with them, but just help them verbally, giving them the literature I know and a brain dump. And their paper would focus on the adoption factors. And I instead would just limit my inquiry to modeling, to critiquing existing modeling approaches in order to try and think about the directions we can go for improving on it. And in fact, I think in our project, we will have at least two approaches to improving on existing modeling. So this paper would be a nice kind of laying the foundation for subsequent work in this project. Raidul and Tammy are working on, with our inputs on potentially an agent-based model. And Christina's working on, for the first time, looking back in time to look at the impact of prior conditions, which has never been done before. And I'm speaking here models more broadly, both in terms of trying to understand how decisions are made and trying to project both. So that's what this product is about. It's about that review paper that is really a modeling critique, laying out the different kinds of models, their shortfalls, and how we should project further into the future. What are the limitations? For example, data, heterogeneity, things like that. There's more to say on the next theme, which I was literally writing as we were talking, but I'll stop there if people have any questions.
So you do want to focus on the heating equipment, right? Last time on the modeling meeting part, I thought it might be a bit broader, household decisions in general.
Thank you. This is only heating equipment. I think even in the modeling meeting, I don't know if I had the wrong impression. I did want to focus on heating equipment, but I would want to draw on literature that informs heating equipment, even if it were more broadly about other household decisions, investment decisions, because that does have a bearing also on heating equipment.
And I think how you write that statement is really important in the beginning, right? Like why heating equipment, why it is different than other things, and then when can other literature inform.
That's that's not a trivial point. That would be something that this paper should have. Yeah.
So you had presented a really nice outline that I thought flowed really well. Maybe bigger question for the group and for individual leaders. It seems useful to have both an overall view of the themes and to be able to dive in a little bit, like see somebody's outline. What's the best way, do you think, of doing that? I know we've got a lot of stuff on the drive and it's maybe hard to filter through it and figure out what's relevant right now. Do you think we should have the backup in a folder, maybe with a link from the slide, like just one item? Or how would it, I'm trying to figure out how to serve you. Like you're working on something and then you say, oh, I think Narsim is writing this review. I wonder if that's covered. And you could just shoot him an email, which is fine. Or would you like to have some kind of, whoops, that's 5 minutes up on this, but would you like to have some kind of backup in the drive?
I would support having us put our outlines on the drive and bibliographies as we develop them.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to move to the next one. Okay, so is this the next one that you
Yeah,
were
that's
talking
me
about?
too. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So this is a new thing most of you don't know. So much like Christina, I found a postdoc at Princeton who wants to work with me on model development and who has 6 months and no funding requirement. And I found a great idea. I thought that specifically I have been interested in this phenomenon that we all know, that something needs to trigger people to want to change the heating equipment in the first place before they think about what it should be. So this two-stage decision, I thought, there's evidence for it, makes a lot of sense. Why don't we try and see what the implications will be of implementing it? So he is very keen to do this using NEMS, which is the model used by the Energy Information Administration and all its projections. So it's a very well-established model that has fuel price projections, blah, blah, blah. Everything is laid out for you. All we have to do is add this layer of a triggering decision. So what we would do is we would run NEMS with straightforward economic payback decision, and that gives you the results that are in the literature. And then we would implement and code another layer, such as based on the age distribution of equipment in the US. The type of, really interesting, Christina, what we found, I spoke to Shangwei yesterday, the age of the AC equipment turns out to be a really important driver as well. So some different criteria, and we would try to see what the implications are of actually implementing explicitly a triggering decision. So this is the theme. This product is actually a model development product, an experiment, a thought experiment using an existing model, but with a modification to illustrate the importance of this two-layer decision.
So question here from me, two questions. One is, how does this differ from the dynamic model, which is basically running on age as a trigger, right? That's its fundamental assumption. And then the challenge was going to be to add different things besides age. And then the second question is, I think NEMS already has equipment age as a factor. Because that's where we're planning to get our lifetimes of heat pumps from what they reported.
Well, second question first. If they do, they use that to determine, I think, the operating efficiency or the operating energy use for their representative agents for the different building types they model, not to represent a two-stage decision. They just have an arbitrary assumption that 20% of the population in every year will consider the heat pump, the technology adoption decision.
Okay, I'll have to check that because it was my assumption that they were triggering it based on age, and I could have misinterpreted that.
No, yeah, not that I've seen. And with regards to the difference from your model, I think of this, I mean, your model would be a whole another decision model, right? You have other agents potentially, you have policies, and you'd have a triggering decision that could be age. Think of this as providing evidence for whether that in fact is an important trigger and what influence it has. And we're also going to consider other potential triggers. I mean, the idea is to try and experiment with different, like what evidence do we have for what may trigger? So for example, heating equipment breakdowns. So we may model like a probability of equipment breakdown based on energy insecurity. which expresses that people have had trouble with their equipment. That's another reason. Or we could experiment with a fuel price spike of some kind as a trigger, which would affect only certain households depending upon what fuel price is triggered. So the theme of this is to just explore the idea of a two-stage decision and different potential triggers. And I think, even the timing of this may be such that it may be even useful to draw on the insights of that to think about what you want to implement.
Yeah, I think when I heard about it before, I was thinking that you were going to be exploring NEMS in some way. Gosh, these 5 minutes go really fast. Maybe we could take this up during a modeling meeting, because I think there's a lot of room in there, so it's definitely possible to explore, but I think there's also the possibility that we end up doing very similar things, and then that's not as efficient. Sorry, I feel like I took over this conversation. So does anyone else have comments on this or questions?
Having done this, not this exact work, Narasimha, but having done a two-stage model of heating equipment retirement, like I'm interested in the topic, but I don't think we have time for like a more in-depth discussion. I just wanted to say.
Oh, I'd love to talk to you about it. I mean, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I think we should take this up on a modeling meeting, and I think you hadn't really scheduled any for the rest of the year, Narasimha, but I don't know if it's worth trying to get us together. So
if you're available, I can still do next Tuesday, the 12th of December.
okay.
Alison, are you available?
Can you say the date again? I just heard December.
12 December at 8 a.m. Mountain Time.
I think that should work. Can I just say tentative? I'm actually in the field in Georgia, Atlanta at that time, but I think in the morning it'd be 8 a.m. Eastern, right?
No,
or
10 a.m. Eastern.
10 a.m. Eastern. I think I should, we're just prepping for field work the next day, so I think I have some flexibility. I'd like to try to join, but if something comes up, I might not be able to, but I should be.
I'll send a calendar invite, and if you can join, that'll be great.
Okay.
Recorded too.
Okay.
But I'd also like to know what you've done, Allison. So.
Oh, I think you know the paper. It's probably embarrassingly simple model, Narasimha, compared to what you're going to do, but.
So just to please do send me the link to the paper. We have a paper out, and this is NEMS. The idea is to just use NEMS. So just to be clear,
right, and I think there's definitely some information content in there, right? Just making all the same assumptions that NEMS does, and how does it compare? Okay, want to go on? Sorry. Christina.
Yes. So this is the study we're working on, the heat pump adoption, using the longitudinal data from the American Household Survey to see what impacts the prior conditions of the households have, like prior heating equipment and so on. And it's a logistic regression. And I've seen that the paper that Adam sent around is also a logistic regression. So that's great. And I will hope to get your feedback in January in a presentation, what Tammy suggested as well, to hear everybody's thoughts on it.
Yeah, I remember Christina's got kind of a quick turnaround, flitting into the group and flitting out. And so this is the product of the work with Narasimha, and then you're going on to something else, right? But this is a pretty rare approach, right? There just aren't that many longitudinal data. Okay, any questions, comments, offers? All right, and I think this, go ahead, Allison.
Well, Tammy, I think you've probably been involved in this more. I guess I just want to say it'd be interesting to know if it's worth learning from the, heating, cooking, stove adoption literature, which is quite vast in the range of, solid fuel, and then advanced solid fuel and then non-solid fuel stuff. There's just been so much on adoption there, and multiple framework papers from people who've been working on that for 5, 10, 15 years. So sometimes I think these adoption literature domains are quite separate from one another, even though they're around very similar ongoing behaviors like regular heating and cooking. But I also respect needing to draw a boundary on what literature fits within the conversation and doesn't.
I'm going to put a note on here about that. It may very well be that it doesn't fit, but I'm just going to make us not forget. Do you want to comment, Christina?
Yeah, that's a great point for the cooking fuel literature. Yeah, I'll definitely check. Thanks.
Okay, 2 question marks to show how uncertain it is. Anyone else?
AHS is a house panel, correct? So it's not individuals, it's homes.
No, it's individuals.
I think we should check on that because I think it follows the house, not the person.
No, it follows the
No, it's the
person.
person,
Yeah.
Because it identifies if they moved or not.
Yeah.
But it identifies if they move, but it's a panel of houses.
Is
I
it?
don't think so.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. I think just double check on that.
Okay.
I think if that's still the case, I think we've had a lot of questions early on about like how people moving in and out relates to this. And I actually think it provides a useful take on that question because it's not actually, does an individual adopt, it's does a house have a heat pump? That's my recollection at least, but I could be really wrong.
Yeah, I'll check.
Do we want to follow up on that, or maybe when Christina prepares her work for presentation early in the year? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this is the participatory system. Oh, I didn't do a good job of setting a timer. Okay, come on. And I should say that in the beginning, participatory system mapping. So the scientific question here is whether different groups representing different roles perceive the same theory of change. Do they have the same things that are going to affect it, the same way it works? And I'm just realizing how poorly this is laid out, but the basic idea is comparing mental maps or causal loop diagrams from different groups. And so a lot of people have been invited to this. Taylor, if you want to say anything about your role, but Taylor is going to be managing the operation, possibly more. She has an interest in this topic. Ellis and I are going to learn to facilitate this kind of work. And then I think one thing I'd like to bring forward is if these maps are different, can we quantify whether they're or how different they are? Like, I think I've seen different maps, and then the product of the map is like, here it is. Look, we have a map. And so my question is, can we be more quantitative about that? So Raidul is going to be applying network theory to comparing those maps. Yeah, so I'm hoping to submit it to get it ready for submission by May. This is a longer timeline than some of you because it actually requires getting people together, having focus groups and so on. So questions, comments? I think this has been kind of fuzzy for people, like it's not clear how and whether it's moving forward. So I think we're trying to get some clarity and concreteness around that.
Do you have an invite list, like who you would invite to it? Yes,
So I think one of the methodological decisions we have to make is which groups are we going to compare? Like how do we decide that somebody is in one group or another group if we're going to say they're different? And so I think that's some of the work that Ellison and I need to do soon, proposing which groups would be invited. Overall, I'm thinking things like, okay, so we had talked about first doing the people who create models, and having these sort of modeling people be one group. Another idea was drawing people from the group that participated in the focus group that Stacy led. And they tended to be a lot of project managers, people who made it possible for the work to come forward. Another one would be occupants. And I think that's a little ways down the road. We're going to try to make our mistakes with the groups that are more comfortable with research, and then see what mistakes are being made before we try to work with people whose terminology may be very different. And then yet another group that we talked about last week is including contractors and installers in this as a separate group and comparing them.
there are many options, of course, the numerous groups you could. I was just wondering, so among academics, the modelers is a great idea. I was wondering about social scientists, those who have studied the question of adoption, perhaps, but not interested in modeling. They're just social science researchers who've looked at homes and their perspective, which would probably be sort of the most informed from the perspective of broad research. And then you have practitioners, and then you have modelers.
So you're talking like a separate academic group, right?
Yeah, I'm just throwing
From
out the idea.
from a modeling versus social science perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Huh. That's interesting too.
Can you clarify the distinction between modelers and social scientists? I mean, I understand modelers, we're thinking about people that model like energy savings and things like that, right? But a lot of, I guess, what I would call social science is modeling behaviors or decision making. And so, like most literature that is about adoption is quantitative in sort of, a lot of it's survey based. And there's a variety of frameworks, and that's within the literature review that we should probably share at some point, but table that for now. Is that there's, I think Ellison even alluded
Notice
to
you're here, Adam.
Yes, yeah. I think Ellison alluded to this a second ago when she talked about the sort of just how broad the literature on adoption is, and there's some social scientists that highlight one factor, and there's conceptual and theoretical frameworks that have, I guess you could say, rhetorical similarities, but they measure things differently and talk about them slightly differently. So I think we should just be careful about, like a lot of social scientists, you said we want to talk to social scientists, not modelers. They'd say, well, we're modeling decision making based upon our survey household of households and why they installed a heat pump or weatherized or whatever. So that maybe want to think carefully about what we some of those distinctions, I guess. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Yeah, no, it's fair. I think a lot of people use the word model in a very different way. And so then we would have to get back to what is our purpose in creating that group? Like what does it help us understand, right? What is the outcome of that group, maybe? So it's a good point. Okay.
I do think So I
Go.
just think looking at the future, people who develop models and projections, there's quite a distinct community of engineering economists, distinct from those who are looking at existing data or just doing survey work.
Yeah,
field work.
I would agree. I think those literatures are, I don't know the former very well, but my sense is that they're very separate.
Yeah,
The people who are
that's
doing
what I
sort of,
mean.
yeah. And it'd be interesting to have them, I don't have them all in a room one day.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It will require some careful justification. I want to go on to Chris's.
Yeah, I I think most of you are pretty familiar with my role and what I'm working on currently. So I'll just kind of leave it open if you guys have any questions. We do now have 13 done, so not as moving as rapidly as it was a couple weeks ago, but yeah, we'll see what happens. But definitely during the spring, it will pick up more.
May I ask a quick question? What happened that we got so many responses all of a sudden?
Well, there was a sort of an odd combination of people that had responded to previous mailings, and then there were a handful of people that I called, and they were more or less saying, "Oh yeah, I was going to get around to responding to you. Thanks for calling," and allowed me to set one up with them.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll try calling more from this last round that you sent me, but I did have one person pretty much immediately
Cool.
called me, and we kind of did it then and there.
Okay. I don't know if I merged the phone numbers on. You have the phone numbers for everybody who had a permit in Pueblo, so you could look them up, but I could also send them over if you'd like me to read around them with phones. So
Okay.
Well, anyone else? Comments, questions, offers? Christina sent around an interesting paper that was kind of looking at some of this, but they didn't actually use interviews. So just wanted to call that out.
I can post it in the chat.
Yeah, I think you sent the link to everybody. Not sure, but anyway, so it'd be worth, I think, understanding what you can get from interviews that the folks who wrote that paper didn't, and they did a computer-based survey, but then they allowed people to make free form responses. Okay, moving on. Raidul.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm leading on development of an ABM model that captured the interrelations between the influential actors in the heat pump adoption process. So for now, our interest of actors are occupant, household, contractors, and institutions, organizational institutions. So like, for example, many of you remember that we have had a conversation on what would be the occupant characterization in this kind of heat pump adoption process. So we took that into consideration, and based on suggestions and comments from Tammy, I am actually starting the coding of the ABM model just for the time being the occupant. So for time to time, you'll see us, both of us, reaching out to all of you to have some discussion on another agent characterization. So that is our current approach. And as you can understand that we are considering so many different characters. So I will need the most input from everyone of you, having your expert knowledge on different of those multi-layered characterization.
So I want to add to this a little bit, Raidul, if it's okay. The data from Kartik that we're using is representing the heterogeneity in Colorado. It's the currently Kartik has shared with me Puma level data. And we've talked about extending this beyond Colorado, but the idea is we're going to start with one place first. And then the other thing that's not here is a building object that Zara is working on. And that provides estimated heat use based on the kinds of relationships that NREL has put together. And that allows an assessment of, sorry, what's the word, of a cost comparison. You about to say something, Narasimha?
No, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, and I think this is where we need to identify overlap and distinction, because it could be really easy to just say, look how many heat pumps we have now in each paper, right? And then, and if that's the only output, then we could be duplicating or competing, but I don't really think we are.
Yeah, just to comment on that, I think, more than, oh, these are better projections, I think what we're trying to do is to lend insight into what some of the drivers are that are not being modeled today. And so I see the value of Raidul's work as these different agents being represented. Nobody does that, in existing models. And then in ours, it would be the fact that decisions are two-stage or whatever. So yeah, I think there's potential for overlap, but it could be good overlap and not redundancy. Yeah.
I agree with you, but and so this is where we need to do some work, because I think what you're calling two-stage, we already sort of have, or at least it's okay. So not listed here is also my cohort model that does pretty much the same thing, except not with agents. And so it can't represent as much heterogeneity. But from my view, it's already nominally a two-stage model because it uses the age to determine when you select a new device. Now we are also starting, or Raidul is starting with just a couple of objects, being the building and the occupant, just to get it running. Those are going to be the same factors that you're looking at. So that's why I don't think we really have a problem, but I think we should forestall having a problem.
Yeah, and let's discuss that on Tuesday.
Good. Okay. And Kartik.
Yeah, so this is sort of a reframing, I would say, of what I had been working on so far. So, some of my earlier presentations, I was trying to understand well-being from different perspectives. So looking at different frameworks and how each framework sort of characterizes well-being. And what we thought recently was that to somehow ground this approach from a policy perspective. So we've sort of we're trying to go back to the Justice 40 tool, which has a bunch of definitions for how to identify and define disadvantage. So you're going to use that as a starting point to see how our approach, which, the Fuse data set, going to use that and see how the results from that compare with what is already out there. And with the ultimate goal of trying to see, well, who's missing out with the existing tool and how we can sort of contribute towards identifying households that sort of miss out because of either lack of data, lack of indicators, just what the Justice 40 tool doesn't have in its current format. So yeah, just comparing our results with what the state of the art is in terms of EJ screening tools. And yeah, that is sort of the approach, or the change in approach we've recently tried to take. Yeah.
So question for you, Kartik. You've shown a lot of figures to the team about different measures of, I can't remember if it's vulnerability, but well-being. And I'm curious, like, does that appear in this paper, or have you gone completely to sort of comparing with EJ40? Because I feel like you've done a lot of this exploration.
It is going to be part of this. So for example, in some of my previous analysis, I was looking at things like energy insecurity, right? So in its current form, the EJ40 has an energy cost burden. So you could sort of put both of these next to each other and say, okay, if you use the energy cost burden, these are the households that you're capturing with that indicator. But now we have this other energy insecurity indicator, which we think is also a pretty reasonable indicator of well-being. And if you sort of overlap both of those, you could see who's in there, who's missing out, things like that. So it's still part of the same question, just that we'll be using the Justice 40 as a starting point, and then see what's in there and what else can be added to that potentially.
I can just add to that though, Tammy. I mean, you're right that, there's so much work on exploring the relationship between different well-being drivers and subjective well-being. It's not explicitly part of this, and I think it looked like it's hard to make any conclusive insights from that, because so much of it is just not strong enough at that level of aggregation, and we're using synthetic data. So I wouldn't mind a little brainstorm with you and others who are interested. Can we make a paper of it that really makes an impact? Because I just felt it's a lot of work. I agree, but we've had bad experience with the previous iteration of this, that it needs to be stronger in terms of what it says rather than a bunch of really interesting descriptive correlations. So I think he's got enough there for a separate paper besides this, what you're seeing here. And I would be curious for having a conversation separately on that to see if it can be. I'm not convinced.
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. And I think also maybe taking a step back and saying, what does this mean? What do these correlations mean, right? Or what can something be drawn from it? And that's the first step toward creating impact. It's not all the steps.
That is exactly where I got stuck, as in I couldn't convince myself that there was a strong enough message despite all the work.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, I've got you down for a brainstorm. We are accumulating meetings for we've got our meeting set till mid-February. Okay, Ellison, sorry to make you last by you going first, but here it is.
I think I've talked with some people more in depth than others, and I'll be presenting next week on progress made on this proposed theme or topic. I would like to conduct a review of a set of papers that have represented well-being in studies that take place in people's homes and that may consider energy systems as part of that household environment, but don't have to. And I'm particularly interested in how well-being has been measured. Second to that, I'm interested in how well-being has been conceived in those papers. And so I'll give a concrete example. If a person or team wants to conduct a study of indoor environmental quality and well-being, they may measure temperature and relative humidity, produce a metric of thermal comfort, and say that they have measured well-being. And in fact, they have measured an indicator of, or satisfier, or of well-being, but they're usually not explicit about what kind of measure of well-being they have. And Tammy and I have been talking about different types of measures. There might be needs or satisfiers or indicators. There's other language. We haven't landed on that firmly yet, but we're trying to understand what's the taxonomy of measures, and then within that taxonomy, what's been represented in studies that are field-based. And the idea is that my hypothesis is that there are some measures that are overrepresented in that field-based literature and some that are underrepresented or completely absent, and that there has been a lack of a decision-making rubric for measuring well-being when you're talking with people in their homes, or you're measuring things about people and from people in their homes. And this will be a sort of the first phase of this is a literature review that Zara is working on with me. Next week, I'll be presenting sort of the papers that we've discovered so far that fit within this review for discussion as a team about what gets included and what's getting excluded. I can say more, but I'll stop there because I think we're pretty close to time.
No, I didn't want to cut you off.
I was a little rushed, or I feel like I was a little fast, but.
So I think I'm hoping to hear from Narasimha as we move forward on the issue of the indicators, satisfiers, needs, because he's done work on that in another context. And I feel like almost nobody does. Like, they either talk about it very broadly, in terms of the basic human needs are different from the thing that satisfies them, or they talk about it practically and then they don't address that point. And I know the paper you shared around Narasimha, your one with Min, does attempt to do that, but in a different context. So I feel like I have to keep trying to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, I mean, there's not many people who've gone down that path, you know, the thinking of satisfiers of needs. But there's literally a handful of people who've written about this. And so, you know, I can just share that with you and think about how useful that is. And those people mainly are those who've thought about basic needs. So there's human need theories. And in terms of satisfiers, other than the one Max Neef paper, it's Doyle and Guff who have really written about that. And there's a book, Theory of Human Need, and a few others. So yeah, I can just share. A lot of that is in the bibliography of the paper, the Decent Living Standards paper, by the way. So, but happy to have a discussion about it.
Yeah, and I've looked at some of those, but I feel like this might be, Ellison, I don't want to derail the discussion of your paper, but I think there's a sort of philosophical element of like, what is a satisfier? And then there's something really practical about how do we understand if somebody's well-being has improved. I feel like this might be helpful in addressing the question about Kartik's work, because I think what he can measure or in the Fuse data set is really satisfiers, and then and there's a big leap to well-being. So I feel like unpacking this a little bit could be useful.
I think that's a useful idea, and you laid it out in a meeting earlier. At least that's what you're thinking about, and I do think it's useful to think about a contribution there. However, my initial thought was, it looks like it's still distinct from this product that Ellison is working on. I mean, it seems it
Yes.
could be its own thing.
Yeah, I'm hoping to write like a really short section that says like, oh, there is this other stuff, and here's how I think we relate, without having it explode. Thank you everyone for attending. And join us next week for Ellison's exposition or beginning of exposition of well-being. Oh, Adam, that's so embarrassing, your poor son.
Oh, I'm sorry, Adam. Good luck.
All right, thanks everyone. Sorry for keeping
Bye.
this to the very end of the hour, but have a great weekend, and we'll meet next week for the last meeting of the year.
All right.
Bye.
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 Hi.